I was too afraid to feel the feelings. I was
Mm-hmm.
too afraid to acknowledge that my son might never speak. I had to start feeling all the feelings. I crashed, I burned, I started feeling everything. It's grief. That's what it
Right.
is. I was not grieving the boy. I was grieving the loss of the expectations that I had. And it's okay that I expected my son to talk. I will say that you feel how you feel. You're allowed.
Hello and welcome to Fresh Take from What Fresh Hell, laughing in the face of motherhood. This is Margaret, and today I am talking to Carrie Cariello, Kate Swenson, and Adrian Wood, who are the authors of the new book, Autism Out Loud. Kate Swenson is the creator of the blog and Facebook page Finding Cooper's Voice. You will recognize her. We have spoken to her on the podcast before. She speaks regularly about autism, parenting, and motherhood, and is a contributor to Today Parents, The Today Show, and the Love What Matters blog. Carrie Cariello is the author of What Color is Monday? Someone I'm With Has Autism, and Half My Sky. Adrian Wood is the creator of the vlog Tales of an Educated Debutante. She has a PhD in educational research and contributes to Today Parents, The Today Show, and the Love What Matters blog. Welcome to all.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
So let's start where we often start, with the title, Autism Out Loud. You talk about this in the opening of the book. Adrian, what brought you to the title Autism Out Loud?
I think we all really came to the quick realization that this book is about living out loud.
Mm-hmm.
And we might have thought we could escape under the radar before. And now that we have these people we love in our lives, we definitely are out in public and we live out loud. And that was really important to us, so that somebody might say, wow, that's me too.
And it's interesting. I have a child with autism myself, and there's a famous expression in the autism community: when you've met one child with autism, you've met one child with autism. And in reading this book, it's interesting and I think important to talk about how autism takes many different forms, and that our experience as parents of kids with autism can be very different. So why don't each of you take a moment and kind of talk in as encapsulated a way possible, because we could certainly do 5 hours on just this topic, a little bit about your child with autism, what their situation is, and what that journey has been like for you. Kate, why don't you start us off?
Yeah, that's so true. All three of our boys have very different autism profiles. And when we came into this book, we wanted to make sure that we gave space to each story, but make sure that we didn't say one was harder or easier, because it's not. We're not saying that at all. They're just different. And there's so many parallels that overlap. Cooper's 14. He's an 8th grader. We just found out where he's going to high school next year. And no one ever talks about autistic children growing up. So this is a whole
Right.
playing field.
At 4 years old, we're kind of like, well, that's all we know about autism.
It's exactly it. No one ever talks about it. So we're doing that. And so Cooper he carries the same diagnosis he got when he was 3, severe nonverbal autism with a language impairment. We've added a few extra fun things like apraxia, anxiety, OCD, ADHD, because we can't leave those out. I would say Cooper's thriving. That's what I try to focus my story on. He is thriving and he's happy, and we're a happy family. He has lots of challenges. And as he's getting older, though, I'm learning that his struggles, I worry more about people's reaction to them than what he's actually doing. So I find myself trying to teach kindness to the world and teach awareness to the world so I can protect this boy.
And Carrie, tell us about your son.
Yeah. So my son, Jack, is 20. He'll be 21 this spring. And just as Kate said, there's very little conversation about what happens when autism grows up. What happens with kiddos like my son after high school, any potential programming for them, or where therapies begin and end and all of that. So I'm really happy to say that he's in his 3rd year of a very supported community, and he's living in an apartment, and he takes 2 classes a semester at a local college near him. And he's just taking these tiny steps towards independence. And it's just really a most beautiful thing to watch.
And Adrian?
Yes, so I have the youngest one of the group. My son Amos is 11 and in the 4th grade. And this has been a big year for us. He is growing like a weed. I think we've gone 4 shoe sizes since August.
Yeah, we're doing the same at my house. We're going bankrupt on shoes around here.
I can't catch up to him. And he is a joy and a pleasure. And we are really, right now, it always changes, but we're in the throes of general education and special education. And him following this general ed track, we've had a boost in anxiety lately. So that's where my mind is, and trying to handle that and figure out how we can have the best Amos that Amos can be, keep him happy and safe. I think I said to his teacher yesterday, I want him to like school, but I also want him to learn. So sometimes those two things don't look the same.
Sometimes for all children, I will say, they do not look the same. Liking school and doing well in school and getting educated for all of my kids is something of a challenge. So let's start. I like the way that you visit the moment of diagnosis with the lens, and this is something I often say to people when I'm talking about autism, that the diagnosis changes nothing. It's actually just the same kid the day before and the day after. It's just information. But I think for a lot of us, when we start to feel that icy prick of worry that something's a little bit different with our kids, that it feels like the diagnosis, Kate, you say autism is a suitcase I carry every day. It feels like the diagnosis is the moment someone is handing you that suitcase against your will. But that's not actually accurate. Kate, talk a little bit about that.
The same boy that went into the appointment was the exact same boy that came out. And
Right.
I can everything you just said. It felt like this young psychologist handed us this diagnosis, and I was like, "Oh no, we're good.
We'll
You
pass.
have that."
We're all good. Thanks. We
thanks
don't
for
want it.
picking
No
us.
thanks.
I'm honored. But it really felt like it had been tattooed on our foreheads. Even when we walked out of the appointment, I'm probably making it up, but it felt like people in the waiting room were like, "Oh, sad." And I was making it up in my mind. But the other thing I'll touch about that diagnosis is I felt relief when we got it, and that always surprises people. I felt relief because I thought for sure they were going to give me a prescription and say, this is what you need to do now. Something is wrong. You do these 5 things and he'll be fine.
Right.
And that doesn't happen. It's like, good luck. I wish you the best. Out we
Right.
went. I dove in like these other mothers did. I was ordering books and reading blogs and just trying to find out. But there are no clear-cut answers. I felt more alone than ever after the diagnosis, even though we'd been admitted to this club.
And Carrie, talk a little bit about that as well. I read your piece a long time ago about seeing a girl check out Jack in the store. And that moment, we often say on the podcast, the pain is in the, and I kept thinking of that line when reading this book, that like, there are the realities, you understand the realities, but somehow other people seeing the reality is painful in a way that you're never expecting.
I just want to preface it by saying that Jack's been diagnosed for almost 20 years now. And I didn't know a single person back when he was first diagnosed who had a family that looked like ours. I didn't know a single person raising a diagnosed child. The only exposure truly I'd ever had to autism was I watched Rain Man with my mother one day in high school on the couch on a Sunday. So it was brand new to me. And we've kind of navigated that journey for almost 2 decades. But yeah, Jack's a young man now. He is 6'5" at least. Big, tall, handsome guy. And I was out and about with him. We were doing some shopping and I noticed this kind of gaggle of high school girls and one noticed him. And I thought, oh, that's so interesting. But then Jack's autism manifests in a few ways, and primarily his physical attributes, meaning the way he moves, he flicks, he jumps, he paces. And so he sort of launched into that stimming, and I just saw her whole face change and her eyes dropped to the floor and she shuffled and kind of moved about her way. And I compare autism's tiny stings to like paper cuts. They're big in the beginning. They revisit you when you least expect them. And I talk to people behind me on the journey and say, just lean into that. There's really no escaping them. They're there and they're real.
And Adrian, talk a little bit. You say, I'd been raised to see success as the natural outcome of hard work. And I think for a lot of us, reading the book, hosting a podcast, thinking about how to raise kids, that sometimes autism feels like whoa, I don't have a book for this. This feels like a completely different track. And I came from a family of extremely high achievers. And the idea that we were somehow on a different path was, again, part of this confusion and pain that came with the diagnosis.
And I think we have a chapter on what does success look like.
Yes, absolutely. And you
Did I
have the
make that up?
beautiful story about the dad talking about the daughter who is a checker at the grocery store.
fine.
Yeah.
I think for me, I had different than my co-authors in my lineup. I had 3 typically developing children, and then I had Amos. So I sort of at that point was patted myself on the back for my parenting skills.
Out here killing it.
I had this under control.
Yep.
And then this diagnosis came along. And to back up to that a little bit, I've never spoken about this. I was really ashamed that I didn't know. This was my background, my area. I had worked as an early interventionist. And here I have this over 3-year-old and they say autism. And I think, what? Like, how did I not know this? And Amos also has a genetic disorder. So we were following a path of some physical differences that he has. But the success thing has really been tricky for me, and really over the time of sharing our story, because I couldn't, Kate and I both, I think, say we went to get the book. And the only book I could find was a dad had written about his daughter with Down syndrome. And I bought it. I just wanted anything to grasp onto and to maybe help me validate these feelings I was having. But over time, I realized, boy, success can look very different. And I would argue that Amos is the most successful person in our household. I remember when my 9-year-old cried because Amos held a spoon for the first time, and marking those moments of, wow, this is hard work and success. Very different than the way I was pushed to go.
Harvard or bust is not part of the equation anymore, as it turns out, which we will discuss is a gift in and of itself. Absolutely. Kate, you were nodding when I was referencing the story of the young woman who works at the grocery store. Can you tell that story? Because I feel like it's so meaningful about how we measure success for our kids.
So honestly, I was exactly where Adrian was and what she was describing. I was trying to figure out what success looked like for Cooper. For a big chunk of his life, ages 4 to 8, we stood still or we regressed. That's what it felt like. We weren't moving forward. It wasn't even baby steps. It felt like we were frozen in time. And I ended up at this event, some sort of event, and talking to this father who was telling me about his 4 children. And you'll have to read the book to get the exact story, but one was a doctor, one was a lawyer, one was something else. And then he just started beaming, talking about his daughter who works at Walgreens or a grocery store. And he said she takes public transportation and she works a few hours a week and everyone loves her. And I have goosebumps. And she's so proud of herself. And he said with tears in his eyes, everyone assumes I'm the most proud of my lawyer or my doctor, but it's my daughter who works this job because she had to work the hardest to get there. And I say that about Cooper. One of the gifts that autism gives us is I remember every huge and small thing in his life. Or with my neurotypical kids, I don't remember when they held a spoon or drank from a cup. And I'm telling you, I can remember the first time Cooper drank from a cup and crying. So weird gift that you get.
Yeah, it's the small victories are huge victories, as it turns out. So let's talk about the role of anxiety. I thought this was really useful. And I want to open up this conversation. We have a lot of listeners who have kids with all sorts of different needs. We have a lot of listeners whose kids are on the autism spectrum, but I think there's so much to take from this book just about parenting in general. And one of those things, it's not unique to us, but the iceberg metaphor that parenting experts often use, which is an iceberg you see the tip of, but to solve it, you need to get below and see what is underneath all of that is feeding it. And I think all of you had experiences with the comorbidities that were under some of the behaviors that you were seeing. So Carrie, talk to us about that. And I think it's useful for all parents to think about what is being communicated and what is the root cause underneath that.
Yeah, so we call that in our house the why behind the what.
Yes.
And most often the what is a behavior that's unsavory, inappropriate, or new, just new. I was, again, like brand new to the autism story, and no one ever warned me that anxiety was a comorbidity, ever,
Mm-hmm.
until we landed in a doctor's office with a boy who was pulling his fingernails out and his teeth out.
Mm-hmm.
And we were, our whole entire household was affected. In the book, Autism Out Loud, I write that comorbidity is such a dark, ugly word because it brings to mind death and grim and gruesome. Anxiety will not be the end of Jack. It also doesn't let him live at all.
Mm.
We opted to use medication to smooth some of those edges, but I always want to emphasize to people that Jack, even at 20, struggles greatly with severe anxiety and OCD. And that continues to be sort of our below the water iceberg.
That you're fixing. And Adrian, you had a similar story and also dealing with the genetic component and researching what was underneath this.
Yeah, I write in the book that we were drowning. We couldn't get dressed. We couldn't get out the door. We were this frozen in time part of that Kate's talking about. Everything was getting worse. And I think Amos was about 5, and someone reached out to me because of my page and said, you need to go see a pediatric psychiatrist. And so I found one at Duke Autism, and we got in there, and I write about this in the book. The doctor said, what you're talking about is anxiety, not autism.
Mm.
And that was the first time I had heard that this was a thing. And Lexapro happened to be the first medication we started, one of our many tools in the toolbox.
Right.
And the teacher texted me that first day and said, Amos sat in the circle for 5 minutes.
When you're an autism parent, you're like, whoa, the square. I never heard so much about sitting on a square in my life. I was like, people, calm down about your squares.
But like, to be in school, you have to sit to learn at some point, right?
Yes.
I mean, some of these things we have to do. So it was big for me. And I think this was probably the most important chapter for me to write, because I felt like it was so helpful to know these things and to just know your options.
And that touches on something, Kate, the idea of bringing the world to your kids and your kid to the world, that there are two sides of that equation, because as we know, the world is hard to change and our kids are hard to change. And so how do you balance that equation of figuring out how much your child needs acceptance and how much it's education? It's a huge question, but what are your thoughts on that?
That is a line we walk every single day.
Right.
Every single day it crosses my mind. So we are just starting to venture back out into the community. We're just starting, and sometimes I get some pushback from that by other parents that are like, I've always taken my child in the community. And I respond with, that's awesome. I'm really happy
For you.
There's nothing that we want more. We have 4 kids. We have a vibrant family with sports and activities. So it's hard having to constantly juggle 1 staying home, 1 go, or 3 going. Cooper's our nucleus and he's happiest at home, but he cannot live his whole life at home. At
Right.
some point, he has to be able to go into the community. So we're just venturing out now. And I actually just had this talk with Adrian the other day. Would it be easier if we just put our kids in t-shirts that say, I have autism? I mean, it's crossed every parent's mind. Would people be kinder? And I touch on this in the book. I have a friend who told me that she has her autistic son ride in a wheelchair sometimes because people are kinder when they think there's a physical disability.
Right.
And then it's like, well, why would we want, she's so torn. She's like, I don't want that. But I don't have the answers to that question yet. I'm glad you brought it up, but I think everyone can relate. We're just navigating it every day, bit by bit.
And I think the individuality, there's a woman on TikTok who bikes a lot with her son who has autism, and he wears a bright yellow kind of pinny, and it says, autism be kind on it.
Yes.
And I think that there is some pushback that, like, why would you? It's a very hard thing to navigate as a mom. People have a lot of opinions on it, as they do about all aspects of motherhood. But it is the kind of thing of, my child doesn't need that. So why would you label your child? Carrie, talk a little bit about community. It can be complicated. I think sometimes with other things, I'll use an example of like childhood cancers. There's kind of a universality in that community, even though people may have very tough diagnoses and diagnoses that are more curable or whatever. But the universality in the autism community seems a little hard to access to me sometimes.
Yeah, that's a great point. I often say what's complicated is that autism is an invisible diagnosis.
Right.
It resides in brain wiring. It resides in neurological symptoms. And those often manifest as, like I've referenced before, behaviors or like pushing back on social norms or questioning what is universally accepted in terms of like why we say hello when we answer the phone or why we say please and thank you, why such and such isn't a swear word. Those are all things Jack has brought up to us.
Right.
And it's such a fascinating conversation about having your child wear something that communicates that diagnosis. My son, Jack, I'm thinking that over now. My kid, he'll be home this week and I might ask him, would you wear something that says I have autism on it? It's an interesting conversation. He often thinks people don't realize it.
Right.
So he works part-time as a dishwasher in an Italian restaurant. And he's always said, my manager does not know I have autism. And we say, okay, now I've met the manager and I'm pretty sure everybody's like on board.
Right.
But this week he texted our group chat and said, I'm going to tell her. I think it's time I tell her. I don't want to hide this.
That's big. Very
It's
big.
so big for Jack.
And I have a new driver in the house and we bought big, what's the word I'm looking for? Big magnetic stickers that go on the car. And it says new driver because you want people to know when this car is driving around, please don't lay on the horn when he takes an extra second at the stop sign because it's freaking him out and he's already having a hard time. And I think I see both sides of it, that labeling somebody, there's consent issues that get very confusing. But I do think, I mean, it would be nice if nobody laid on the horn ever for anybody else and we all treated each other decently, but we know that part isn't going to happen. So I do want the magnetic sticker that says this is a new driver, be nice to him. But I understand the confusion in that. Adrian, how does that play out for you in your house?
So we have kind of a new thing happening in our house. We have an almost 90-year-old. My father-in-law has moved in with us.
Mm-hmm.
And recently he and I flew together. And so I fly with Amos a lot. And my father-in-law, I had a wheelchair for because I said it's going to be easier to get through security. And when Kate, you were telling that story, it really made me think like it was so easy to get through the airport with him in the wheelchair. So for me, especially flying, I'm torn. I don't want, and they're like, Amos can sit in a wheelchair, but I'm like, he doesn't need one. I don't want him in a wheelchair when he doesn't need one. I want people to recognize he has a different type of disability. And it's equally important than an older person needing a wheelchair. So far, I've pushed back. We have used a sunflower lanyard, but what I've noticed is when you're out in the world, there's just no blanket thing that works.
This brings me to an issue that I am very stuck on, talk a lot about, is that autism parenting, all kinds of special needs parenting, but I think especially autism parenting, we were talking about mom's roles and that we flipped from the 50s where autism parenting was you were the refrigerator mother, you didn't love well enough, you did something wrong, and now you have this kind of broken child and it's all your fault because you're lame. And then we've switched from that story to superhero mom who can find the magic oil that will save your kid's life and make them completely normal, even though we don't even believe in that as a norm anymore. And that place that sometimes we just want to be regular people. Like it's part of the suitcase handover that like, I don't want a cape. I want to take a nap and I want to watch Love is Blind. And I don't want to be a superhero parent. That's not interesting to me. Kate, has that been your experience as well?
The way, like, you're so strong. I don't know how you do it.
Yeah, but Emma, I don't know. I don't feel strong. I just want to get through the day. And I don't want to be the refrigerator mother who is causing all the problems. But the other end of the spectrum, I also don't want, which is forget everything else you ever wanted to be. Now your job is to like lobby Congress, bring the world closer, find the right medication, do the 800 things. And so what do we do with those two sides?
I just want to be a mom. I'm serious. And so I have 3 other children who are younger. They are 12, 6, and 3. And I don't feel like I'm their nurse or their teacher or their therapist. I'm sure there will be things that will ebb and flow. I have no doubt about that. but I am mom with them. With Cooper, like you just referenced, I am everything. Plus, I'm his person and his voice and his advocate. I just want to be mom. I'm just like you. I feel the exact same way. And sometimes when I get I've seen both sides. I've seen the stop being a helicopter mom. Why are you still climbing in the slide when he's 14? And I'm like, I have to because he'll block it and he can't communicate. But then am I giving him too much freedom to let him run around? And I don't know. And I feel like I'm under a microscope on all times with Cooper. And I don't feel that way with my other kids. I feel like everyone is so quick. And when you have a 2 or 3-year-old acting, and I'm air quoting naughty, autism is not naughty, but you're acting out, there's a lot more kindness than there is at 14.
Right.
14 doesn't get the same kindness. And people will be like, why aren't you doing something? Or they'll say things. And it's like, I know what I'm doing. Back up.
Yeah.
I got this.
You talk a lot about it in the book, and it's such a very common experience, I think, is the curves go in the same direction until maybe 2, 3, or 4 for young kids. And then there's I don't even like to say drop off, but there's a splitting of those pathways. Adrian, talk a little bit about that young kids with autism, the behaviors aren't so different. And then there does come a time where you start to see those paths diverge, and there's some pain in that experience.
I think that's right around when I started writing. And now I look back and I tickle myself, but I was like, when he turns 3, it's going to be so obvious, where now I'm like, oh, I had no idea what 11 looks like, or
Right.
14 or 20. We are where we are. But I think that it's always a struggle. Last night we went to church and it was like, do I work for an hour to get Amos ready to go to church, or do I just go? And last night I just went. I took my daughter and 2 friends, and I just went and heard a service and didn't chase him around or wait for the book to come over the balcony. He is welcome there. But I'm trying to give myself grace and saying, sometimes I don't have to do it all. I don't need to be Supermom. Right now, we're focusing on going to school. Now, I said, you're going to school tomorrow, and if you fuss about it, you'll never watch TV again. Now, I don't know if that was the right thing to say. He got out of the car for the first time in like 2 weeks.
It worked. It worked. We would probably say that you'll never watch TV again. It might be a little bit too big of a consequence. But yes, if it worked, we are not here to judge you. I once heard a lady say to a child at a playground, if you don't stop, we are never going outside again. And I just wanted to give her such a slow clap, because I was like, Mom, we've all been there. You are never going outside again. Christmas is canceled. We've all been there when we say the big things.
Well, my dad, I have this PhD in education, and my dad loves to say, I thought none of your children were going to watch television.
Oh, yes. The words do come back to haunt us, don't they? Only educational programming. So I think one of the things that's interesting, helpful about this book is that everyone who has a child with any diagnosis, especially, or as we're talking about today, autism, your first reaction is, what does it mean? How is this going to turn out? What is this going to look like? And that moment of realization or diagnosis, there are so many references in the book, the crystal ball. Like, I just want to know that it's all going to be okay. And so let's talk about that for the moms who are listening, who are in that place. Carrie, what has that experience been like for you?
When Jack was first diagnosed, I kept saying, I want the old mom. I want that mom like 5, 10, 15 years ahead of me on this.
Right.
Who can say, okay, puberty, you're going to want to like stock your house with this, or this is what it could be like in young adulthood. And I am that old mom now. I have the young man. And so I always tell people behind me in the journey, just what you said, it will be okay. It's going to be messy, ordinary, challenging, long, and beautiful, but it will be absolutely okay.
And Kate, you talk, I think, really beautifully in the book, and when we had you on the podcast before, about not skipping the hard parts. You say, like, we can't move on from things that we don't recognize or accept. And so talk a little bit about that piece, because I also think I'm a person who believes in general that the overall public dialogue is not doing any of us any good generally. And I think that the dialogue around autism that is if a mom expresses any pain around it or frustration around it or difficulty around it, you're not accepting your child and autism has aspects for ourselves and our children that are painful, period. Come at
Period.
me if you want, period. And I understand. It's not like people say with a childhood cancer diagnosis, you're not allowed to admit that cancer is hard because somehow you're invalidating your child's experience. Like,
Yeah.
it's hard and it's okay to talk about being hard. I asked you a question and now I'm on my soapbox, so I'm going to let you speak.
That was perfectly said. I'll start by saying autism parenting demands more. So I want to be clear. There is always more that you can be doing or think you should be doing or worry that you're not doing. If I tried one more therapy, would he be able to speak? If I did this med or this supplement, whatever. And so you find yourself, at least I did, in this perpetual state of chaos. If you ask my husband, he would say for many years, I was just hopping from thing to thing. But
Right.
that was what was happening. But the reason why it was happening is because I was too afraid to feel the feelings. I was
Mhm.
too afraid to acknowledge that my son might never speak. I was too afraid to think that he might never live alone. And I'll tell you, 4 years old was the first time I thought, and this is going to sound just nuts, I'm like, I might never be a grandma.
Mhm.
He's never going to get married. He's never going to have kids. And I'm telling you, the hate that I received on social media for saying that, you're limiting him. You have no idea what the future holds. And there's just so much shame. So yes, I had to start feeling all the feelings. I crashed, I burned, I started feeling everything. It's grief. That's what it
Right.
is. And it's not, I want to just say this one sentence before I pass it on. I was not grieving the boy. I was grieving the loss of the expectations that I had. And it's okay that I expected my son to talk. It's okay that I
It's
expected my son.
okay.
It's okay to drive and go to
Mhm.
prom and move out and get married and have a job. I could go on and on. It's okay. And that's my soapbox. I will say that you feel how you feel. You're allowed.
Carrie, talk about that as well.
Yeah, I love that because I'm in a position still that I'm grieving things that Jack will likely never achieve. He doesn't drive. He will likely never have his own child, or all of those things circle my mind. And people are very invested in Jack's success. He's been very successful, but I have to be realistic. And so I'm often told, don't give up hope. And I want to
Right.
say, hope is the very air I breathe. It's like I compare it to barbed silk. Like I breathe it in and it's soft, and I breathe it out and it's spiky and thorny.
Mm.
We never give it up. But I also believe hope is meant to be fluid, because if I can move it from one thing to another, it opens up space, right? He's not really going to drive a car. My husband still has a little bit of hope that he can make that happen. We're not always on the same page on that kind of thing. But if I can say, okay, I really can't count on Jack being able to manage a vehicle safely, but he can memorize a bus schedule and he's fantastic at Uber. And so I can move that hope to something that's a little more practical.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with that. And the same way that, like, I wanted my kid to be a prima ballerina because I got kicked out of ballet school because I was so bad at ballet, and that was going to be my revenge. Spoiler alert, it's not happening for my neurotypical kid. She's absolutely a terrible dancer, which is fine. But I think that there do seem to be guardrails around what we're allowed to feel. And that seems to me insane, I would say. Adrian, what has been your experience with that?
I think the world, like Kate said and Carrie said, they want everything to be positive. You
Yes.
share a lovely, beautiful story. I mean, look who has the most followers on Instagram. It's people that look good,
Mhm.
and it's just surface level joy, happiness. Where when you really get into the dirty details, it makes people uncomfortable.
Mm.
And I think all of us would say sharing the dirty details has really brought us joy because those hard things don't own me anymore. And you can't tell somebody how they feel, and I will die on that hill all day long. Like, you can't tell me how I feel, and feeling those feelings. And like Kate and Carrie, we all have big families, and I dreamt of taking 4 children to do things as a group. Like, I didn't have 4 children, so I could leave one at home when my oldest son graduated. It was heartbreaking to me. And I think we want people to see we're really trying. We're doing the best we can and we're trying. And we don't know the answers. When they were babies, you knew what to do. And now also 3 teenagers. So I'm basically just
You're in it,
along for the
as they
ride.
say. You are in it. Let's talk a little bit about that, the dynamic of having a child with autism within the family. You write a lot about this in the book. And I think if we skip the step of acknowledgement, we can't have any of these conversations. And I think the conversation around how one child with special needs affects the dynamic in the family. Kate, how has that played out for you and your family?
Hugely. So I always say autism is a family diagnosis, and I don't mean the
Mhm.
genetic component.
Right.
Autism affects every person in our family differently, but no one told me that. So I truly thought that once I went on my own grief journey and my husband did, we were done. We were smooth sailing. I have a now 12-year-old who is a natural born caregiver to Cooper. They're 2 years apart. Sawyer's never known a day of life without autism, and his
Right.
brother. He went through his own grief journey and it was hard. We actually got him in therapy just so he could talk about his brother and share. It was one of the best things we've ever done. And of all the mistakes that we've made parenting, the one thing that we've done right is we give each of our other children a safe space to ask any questions they want. And
Mhm.
I'll tell you, adults are afraid to do that because adults always want to have the answer. You don't want to be embarrassed in front of your children and not know. I let Sawyer and Harbor ask anything. And what's come out has been beautiful and heartbreaking. When Sawyer, or my 4-year-old, was on his 4th birthday, he told me, I don't want to turn 12 because I don't want to get autism and lose my voice. Like he
Right.
was scared of it.
Right.
So we just open up the dialogue. We don't whisper autism. We talk about it. And I think it's probably the best parenting decision we've made.
Yeah, it's so complicated, and talking about your kids' friends and how they react to it and our desire for control and to be like, you will never say anything bad about your brother to your friends. It's like, you do say something bad about your other brother to your friend. That's fine. But somehow our one special kid has to live in this bubble where you're never allowed to goof on them because, wait a minute, that's not allowed. Carrie, have you had experiences like that?
Oh, 100%. I have 5 kids and they're all about a year apart. So they were always just this pack that we moved around the world. And autism, like Kate said, was never a secret in our house.
Mhm.
We acknowledged the gifts, we always said Jack has the best memory of anybody we've ever met. And we also
If
communicated.
you want to know what happened 4 years ago on a Tuesday, I got
the
a guy
last
for
time
you.
you had a hot dog, he'll tell you. So we also emphasized to Jack, everybody has a mountain to climb. You're not
Yes.
the only one simply because you're diagnosed. Autism brought a lot of great things to our family. And I remember I talk about this in the book. I did, like many moms, always worry that the others didn't get enough of me on the days that
Mhm.
autism took everything I had. And we had dropped Jack off at his program, which was an incredibly emotional day. If you ever want to see a grown Italian man sob in a parking lot, try taking your diagnosed child to a community program.
Mm.
We dropped him, we turned to the car and went one way, and he turned around and went another way. And it was like probably the most poignant moment of my life. And it was such a testament to how invested his siblings are because they simply dissolved in that parking lot. My daughter could not breathe for how emotional they all were. But so shortly after that, I had all 4 kids. We were sitting, the other 4 kids outside at a restaurant having burgers. And I said that I brought myself the courage to ask the question, did I not give you enough? And they said unanimously, that is not how we remember it. We don't remember being thirsty or hungry for more. We remember always feeling like everybody was just in it together.
Adrian, there's so much in this book that we haven't even been able to get to in our short time together. I'm leaving it to you. You're the wrap-up lady here.
This might be my favorite story in the book, and it's relevant to what we're talking about. When Amos was turning 3, he was heading off to the public school, and my other 3 children had walked 2 blocks to the neighborhood preschool. And I remember we were sitting around the dinner table, or Amos was probably hanging out, but the rest of us were sitting, and they were 9, 7, and 5. And I said, Amos, I was trying to be positive. Amos is going to start public school here, in a month. And the younger 2 were like, oh, great, he'll go to our school. And my older son got up from the table and left. And we finished eating, and I went to find him. And he was sitting in my husband's sort of den, and he was crying on the couch. And I said, "Tell me how you're feeling." And he said, "I don't want him to go to public school. I just want him to be like everybody else."
Mm.
And in that moment, I said, "I do too." And I said, and I really didn't know what his answer was going to be. I said, "If you could trade him for somebody else, would you trade him?" And he sat for a minute and he said, "No, I've gotten used to him." And that's really life with Amos, right? Like, it's hard, but like, he's ours,
Right.
he's ours, and he makes our family so much better. And he's an amazing human,
Love
but
it.
it can be tough.
Yep. It's all truths can exist at the same time.
Right.
This book is Autism Out Loud. It's a beautiful book for parents of children with autism. Also a beautiful book for all people. If you have a child with autism in your life, you have a child with autism at your kids' school, in your scouting group, on your kids' sporting teams. And so I really encourage everyone to read this book. It's so readable. It's very personal, and it's chock full of good information. So Kate, tell us where we can find you and more about the book.
So I'm at Finding Cooper's Voice. I share mostly on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Substack. I'm trying to kind of dabble into a few more things,
All the places.
stressfully, all the places. And Autism Out Loud, it's on Amazon, where you can buy books. So we always love to support an independent bookstore. So check that out first. Libraries, grab it, buy it for someone. Share it with a teacher or a therapist or grandma. I think it's just, we've talked about this numerous times. We think this book is going to change the world. It's going to change how people look at autism.
Love it. And Carrie, where can people find you?
So I am Carrie Cariello. You can also check out, we have autismoutloudbook.com, which lists where we are headed in the next few months in terms of book tour type of stuff. And I'm mostly on Facebook, but I'm also on Instagram and Substack as well.
And Adrian?
Yes, I am Tales of an Educated Debutante on Facebook and YouTube primarily. And yeah, come on over.
And you're driving your car, you're running around after your kids. You don't have time to write those all down. They will all be in the show notes of the episode, along with a link to our bookshop.org, where you can find an independent bookseller selling a copy of this book. Thank you all for joining me today. This was a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.